I want to begin by telling you about this fella. Who here has seen this guy? Goat Man. Couple people. All right, this guy, his name is Thomas Thwaites. And he decided that he was going to biohack himself into a goat. And I think he's like the perfect illustration of the balance between natural living and biohacking, right? Here's what he says. I tried to become a goat to escape the angst inherent in being a human. The project became an exploration of how close modern technology can take us to fulfilling an ancient human dream, to take on characteristics from other animals, blah, blah, blah. But he says, anyways, I ended up in the Alps on 4 legs at a goat farm with a prosthetic rumen strapped to my chest, eating grass and becoming a goat. This guy rocks. Here he is, going up the hill. I used to race triathlon. I think he just put on like a pointy arrow triathlon helmet. Here he is after he fell down. It's hard to get up with the long goat. Maybe the prosthetic rumen is weighing him down. This is something that I don't think any of us feel threatens our future or our well-being. People dressed up as goats roaming the hillsides of the United Kingdom, I think. I think it was the United Kingdom. They're weird like that over there. Anyways, though, there are some things, though, when it comes to biohacking that we might think crosses the threshold in terms of fear or uncertainty. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Does it jive with what our ancestors would have done? And we're going to tackle some of those tough questions today. Gene editing, and gene editing specifically for reduced disease risk. I was having dinner last night with Leandra, and she was talking about how the Chinese are now gene editing themselves, not only to win the Olympics, but to make themselves immune to HIV with this CRISPR gene technology. How many of you in here are uncomfortable with gene technology versus you just being like, hey, do it as soon as it comes out, I'm ready? So depends on the level of. We're talking about like CRISPR technology where you're actually editing your genes. Editing your own genes. Who in here is pretty comfortable with that versus, okay, who in here is uncomfortable with that? All right. How about brain chip implants to improve cognitive ability? Getting a chip implanted in your brain to improve your cognitive ability. We got a hell no. Raise your hand if you're uncomfortable with this. I would say more than 60% of the room. Synthetic blood to improve physical abilities, like synthetically altering blood for increased hemoglobin expression or erythropoietin or something like that. Who is uncomfortable with a synthetic blood transplant? Most of you are into getting your blood replaced. Okay, so the chip stops at brain chip implants and gene editing, but getting the blood put in is okay. I just wanted to show you real quick because they did a really interesting Pew Research study on this. What they found was that for gene editing, about 68% of folks in the U.S. are pretty uncomfortable with it. 69% for brain chip implants, very uncomfortable, and then synthetic blood, about 63%. So you guys are, I would say you almost seemed a little bit more cautious than the general population when it comes to brain chip implants and gene editing, and perhaps less cautious when it comes to getting tubes stuck in your veins and blood implanted inside of you. But there are some things that perhaps are more natural than we might think at first glance, and we're going to discuss a few of these today. Take magnetic touch, for example. There is this concept of the human as what they call the wetware, W-E-T-W-E-A-R. The human is the wetware, and what we put into our bodies is the hardware. And when it comes to magnetic touch and being able to interact with components in our environment, such as the movie. What is the Tom Cruise movie where there's the giant screen in front of him? Minority Report. That's something that people are trying to achieve with magnetic fingertip implants, this ability to be able to interact with our environment via magnetic touch, and people are now undergoing surgery to get these magnetic implants. Now, for those of you who like to dig into the nitty-gritty detail and watch YouTube videos of this stuff, see the actual photos of the surgery, if you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/AHS16, I've got nitty-gritty details of all these stories that I'm going to show to you guys. It's really interesting, though, and I won't read all this to you, but this is a comment or a series of comments from someone who actually got one of these implants, and the actual article that I took this from goes into the surgery itself, which is just crazy. But he says magnets were easy to identify. They lurked like landmines in everyday objects, my earbuds, my messenger bag, sending my finger ringing with a deep sort of probing force field that shifted around in my flesh. And he was able to do party tricks of making one leap across a table towards his finger, like magnets. And he also was able to interact with things like phones. He was able to feel microwave ovens giving off steady fields, pulsating waves. Really, really interesting. But when it comes to these type of implants, we might already be equipped from an ancestral standpoint with a little bit of magnetic touch that I know many of you might be familiar with already. The fact that humans emit an electromagnetic field, as do rocks, as do trees, as does the earth. How many of you in here use earthing or grounding and actually sleep on magnetic fields? How many of you in here camp and get in touch with the ground when you're out camping? This idea of electromagnetic field exposure is one that I'm personally open to. There are very powerful magnets out there, companies like Beamer and Earth Pulse and Magnetico that are now making mattresses and bedding that you can sleep on to enhance your ability to be able to actually get in touch with the same type of frequencies you might experience or be exposed to when you're, say, standing barefoot on the ground or camping or sleeping outside. But as we go through these examples, what I want you to ask yourself is whether or not something is performance enhancing versus whether it's actually tied to our ancestral roots. Because even when we look at these magnetic fields that we can purchase and put under our beds, many of them produce wavelengths that are far more powerful than what we would get from the 7.38 hertz that the Earth emits. And it might be 7.83. I'm saying 7.38, so I sound smart, because if I say 7 without the decimal and the 2 additional digits, I don't sound as smart. It might be 7.38. But either way, that's something I ask myself. So there are electromagnetic devices that do not emit as large a frequency and some that emit smaller frequencies. But this idea behind magnetic touch is something that we kind of already have. Echolocation, this is another. There are people who are now implanting battery packs with amplifiers and microphones in their ears to enhance their hearing, to enhance their ability to know where they are at in space in relation to other objects. This guy is named Rich Lee, and he's actually, this guy whose ear you're looking at is named Rich Lee, in case you didn't recognize Rich based on his ear and his unkempt face. But his neck beard. Anyways, though, so he has this battery pack and amplifier and microphone implanted in his body to allow him to echolocate. But one could argue that similar to bats, humans actually do, with practice, have the ability to tap into our ancestral roots and echolocate. And there's this gentleman. How many of you in here are familiar with Daniel Kish? This is a blind man who rides his bike through the streets of, and I believe once again, it is possibly London, so he can join Goatman in the ranks of the weird. But he does clicks, he does whistles, he makes noises with his mouth, and he's actually able to navigate via both walking and cycling through self-echolocation without the use of an amplifier or a battery pack. And there are books that actually delve into his capabilities. I'll put a link to some of them in the resource page for this talk. But it's really interesting how we could biohack these into our ears, these amplifiers and battery packs, but we can also learn to echolocate as humans without actually implanting technology that could be dangerous, that could expose our brains, our neural mass, to a large amount of electromagnetic pollution when something is implanted in our ears. This guy is perhaps one of the most famous biohackers out there. His name is Kevin Warwick. And he, back in the 70s, was already implanting chips into his body. And specifically, one of the things that he was going after, and here's a little anecdote. It says the chip sent out a signal that allowed a computer to track him, opening doors for him and turning on lights and computers as he moved through the environment. But more interestingly, he did an experiment in which he put a chip in his wife and a chip in himself that would allow him to feel what she was doing, trying to achieve some sort of electric telepathy, being able to interact with other human beings through chips that we have implanted. Many of you are holding your own implanted chips in your hand or have them in your back pockets right now. We call them an iPhone, and that's pretty darn close. I wasn't suggesting that you put it down. I know you're taking copious notes on yours. But the idea here is that we can use hardware to engage in this type of implanted chip technology. I was just reading a really interesting book, though, last week as I was putting together this talk. It's called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. I don't know if you can buy it yet. I think it's available for pre-order. Fantastic book by a gentleman who I'll also mention later on in this podcast, Tom Cowan, MD. And he goes into how when someone speaks to you, someone gives you a command, someone talks to you, someone puts their hand close to you to begin massaging you but hasn't yet began, there is a great deal of evidence out there that we feel, that we sense, that we react to stimuli from other beings prior to our brains even being able to process that information. It's this concept in quantum physics that dictates that the human being is actually able to react to quantum signaling. And what this book goes into is how if we are in a state of low inflammation, if we have water that is structured, that's able to travel through what are called carbon nanotubes, that's able to pass through cell membranes, that's able to actually transmit frequencies very quickly throughout our bodies, we can actually feel other humans' electrical signals more readily, respond to other people's presence more readily. And there's even this concept that if you're lying in bed at night, and let's say many of you have experienced this, including myself, your partner is pissed off at you, right? And you know they're laying there with their back to you, with their eyes open, and you're laying with your back to them, with your eyes open, and you can sense that something's wrong, and they're not even touching you. In many cases, that's you actually responding to their heart's electromagnetic field, to their signals. And there's an argument in this book, as it goes into heart health, about how we may be able to actually enhance that signaling process through something as simple as the type of water that we drink. And so as we begin to look at a lot of these crazy fringe biohacks, it's kind of interesting how we might be able to achieve something very similar. Drinking clean, pristine water, practicing clicks and whistles and echolocation, or maybe even just walking around our bedroom with our eyes closed, or engaging in grounding or earthing, or in the use of these electromagnetic frequencies that are perhaps more native than non-native. So let's look at some other examples. Let's pour through some other popular examples and look at biohacking versus natural living. Fitbits and Jawbones. How many of you in here use these type of tracking devices? Some of you are holding up your wrists proudly, weighed down with multiple bracelets. Sleep trackers, activity trackers, etc. I am on the fence about most, if not all of these, because most of them, they have what's called a Class 3 Bluetooth enabled within the device that is transmitting a signal every 1 to 3 seconds, if they're not also equipped with Wi-Fi. And there is some evidence that Bluetooth signaling can disrupt or cause the blood-brain barrier in rodent models to become leaky. There's a great deal of evidence I know that many of you have seen on exposure to Wi-Fi signals disrupting, for example, the ability of plants to grow, or causing N=1 anecdotal brain fog in humans. Not a lot of good long-term clinical research studies on Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but it's one of those type of things where if you want to be careful, you might want to consider not self-quantifying with anything that has a Bluetooth signal or a Wi-Fi signal turned on, especially one that you can't disable. And when it comes to natural living, I want to talk to you about a very, very complex, cutting-edge method that you can use to track the health of your nervous system and your state of readiness, and a lot of things that these type of devices do for you without exposing yourself to this type of Bluetooth signaling or these type of Wi-Fi signals. It's called your carotid or your radial pulse. You simply wake up or stop at any point during the day, place 2 fingers on your radial or 2 fingers on your carotid, and see what your heart rate is on, and perhaps jot that down. For those of you who eschew constant self-quantification, and I've actually tried because I have self-quantified my non-self-quantification by using heart rate variability to track my heart rate variability with a monitor, while I simply stopped for 60 seconds and put a finger on my radial or my carotid artery. Not only does your heart rate decrease and you get an increase in heart rate variability, but it allows you to, very quickly, for free and cheap, and if you've been through an EMT course, you've done this many, many times on yourself and other people, just to be able to get a glance at what's going on without being tied down to technology. Okay, these things are not rocket science. Trust me, you guys your heads are not going to be spinning for the next 20 minutes. Some of this stuff is going to be pretty straightforward. Okay, you see people now wearing elevation training masks. Or I have, for example, a giant HEPA air filter in my garage that will reduce the partial pressure of oxygen in the air. Perhaps you sat in on Todd's presentation and know some of the benefits of either intermittent hypoxic exposure or even long-term hypoxic exposure, which was actually a new concept for me based on Todd's talk that he just gave in this room. So you can go out and you can use hypoxia to do things like increase erythropoietin or red blood cell precursors, to increase pain tolerance, to decrease the central governor's propensity to shut you down at a high level of physical exertion. There are all sorts of benefits to hypoxia and to using things like power lungs and elevation training masks and HEPA air filters. However, there are other things that you can do too that achieve a similar effect. And I am not kidding. Breathing through a straw simulates the same type of inspiratory and expiratory muscle triggering and the big buildup of CO2 dead space or dead space in front of you that you're breathing CO2 from. Hypoxic breath hold walks. I just did one of these yesterday. All you do is every time you reach a telephone pole, you hold your breath for as long as possible and then you keep walking. Box breathing walks. I'll do these as well, where as I'm walking through an airport, I'll take 4 steps and breathe in. 4 steps and I hold my breath. The next 4 steps I breathe out. The next 4 steps I hold my breath again. There are all sorts of ways to engage in the benefits of hypoxia without actually biohacking, without strapping a mask to your face, without buying an expensive HEPA air filter. So think about that. How can you engage without the use of a biohacking device in just basic hypoxia during the day? I even have a phone app downloaded to my iPhone called the Static Apnea Table app. And it simply makes this little beep when you're supposed to hold your breath and then a beep again when you release. Freedivers use this app. But it's great for anybody who wants to tap into those benefits of hypoxia without moving to Boulder or buying a HEPA air filter or buying an elevation training mask. Let's look at another one. Another couple of items. Electrical muscle stimulation. Electrical muscle. I snapped this photo of myself the other night doing EMS because I'm working on my JLo status. So electrical muscle stimulation, the concept of this is that there are both weak and powerful EMS devices that if you attach them to your cells will do things like simulate a 600-pound squat by recruiting both fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fiber, bypassing most of the central nervous system and instead recruiting that fiber with electrodes that you attach to the muscle. Probably the most powerful example out there is one called the ARP wave, the ARP wave. There's another one called the Compex that's like a home unit that's not quite as powerful, but pretty powerful in terms of recruiting muscle fibers. They've done research studies on these, and they actually work. And one of the ways that they work best is when you keep a muscle in a locked out state in which lactic acid can't be pumped in or out of the muscle. And then you put on these electrical muscle stimulation devices, and they essentially build up a crap ton of lactic acid in the tissue without that lactic acid being removed. And so you upregulate your ability to be able to buffer lactic acid. Now, they're great for other things, people who are bedridden, can't work out, etc. But if you wanted to simulate these same effects without actually attaching electrodes to your body, there's this other really advanced method. It's called a wall squat or an isometric hold, or anything in which you hold a position for a long time without allowing the muscles to move. I actually have been known to sneak into airport bathrooms, the kind that have the lock on them for one person, and do 20-minute workouts where I'm just choosing 5 different exercises and holding each for 5 minutes. Just a basic isometric routine to simulate what a lot of these electrostim units are doing. Very, very simple method that you can add to your repertoire to engage in a more ancestral form of lactic acid buffering compared to electrical muscle stimulation. Another one that I would consider to be a biohack is this concept of brand new meal replacement drinks. This one is probably one that I would say in our ancestral health community we already know is not that healthy. Soylent. Here's the ingredient list for Soylent, which... And there are some ingredients in there that I would not be opposed to consuming, rice protein, oat flour, some of the vitamins, etc. But then there's, sucralose, and I don't know how much soybean lecithin is in there. One of the main oils is canola oil. It is not necessarily something that I would say as a biohacking or a biohacked meal replacement would necessarily fall into that it is healthy for me and it is going to help me live a long time category. But at the same time, and I learned this technique from the author of that book that I showed you earlier, who also has a great book called How to Eat Your Vegetables. we now will take our vegetables from our garden and put them in the food dehydrator. So we have an Excalibur food dehydrator. It's a really good, Excalibur makes really good ones. They're like big ovens that you can put large amounts of fruits or vegetables into. And then you get a good blender, like a Vitamix. You take that low temperature dehydrated collection of vegetables and you Vitamix them. And what you wind up with, especially if you store them in dark, opaque containers without a lot of exposure to oxygen, are these really dense vegetable powders that you can use as meal replacements. So you can use on the go, or you can combine them with things that would normally be less nutrient dense, like, say, whey protein isolate. And it's a very simple way to use or to simulate what they're trying to achieve with a biohacked meal replacement, and just do something that, frankly, if our ancestors would have had access to a dehydrator and a blender, they would have instead used sunlight and a mortar and pestle. This is the type of thing that you can achieve for yourself without purchasing an expensive biohacked meal replacement blend. Let's keep going. These Space AG recovery boots. I own these. I use them. I am not arguing that I eschew this type of technology. This is gradated compression. They developed it at NASA. It's wonderful for athletes, and I use it to make my legs feel light as a feather for the next day's workout after I've finished the previous day's workout. It pumps blood from the feet up to the hips in a gradated compression fashion. And so it's wonderful for removing lactic acid and other metabolic byproducts from tissue, as are compression tights and compression socks and the bright tight things that you see CrossFitters wearing. But you can also do something that you likely would have seen many of our ancestors doing, although I don't have studies or evidence based on this, upside down, inverted positions. I was inverted for 15 minutes this morning in my hotel room. Okay, just inverted, listening to music and podcasts, getting blood flow to my brain, draining my legs, and achieving much of the same effect as you get with that type of biohacky compression, increasing capillaries to the head. I have an inversion table that I do the same thing on, but it's not that difficult to add inversion as a 2 times a week protocol without buying these type of expensive biohacks. See, we're hardwired to think that if we can do it with our own bodies in a wall, it must be stupid or ineffective or incomparable to many of these expensive things that we see marketed at, biohacking conferences, et cetera. But the truth is, by writing these things down and just trying them out and seeing what vibes with your daily routine, you don't necessarily have to be that fringe biohacker that scares the neighbors away. Cryotherapy chambers, this concept of stepping into a chamber for 2 to 3 minutes. How many of you in here have done cryotherapy? I've done it. And I've done the other version of it that I'll show you in a second. Cryotherapy works. It decreases body temperature, increases production of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, decreases production of cytokines. You get a big dump in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If you have a cryotherapy chamber next to your house, great. If you want to spend that $60, $70, $80 per session to get into a cold chamber for 3 minutes. However, when it comes to the pressure of cold against the skin, the therapeutic effect of H2O, and many of the other benefits, including vagal nerve stimulation, which is great for your parasympathetic nervous system, nothing holds a candle to cold water, okay? Cold water, again, this morning, not only did I invert, but I did a 5-minute cold shower. Right? These are little things that I'll put into my routine when I don't have my fancy space age recovery boots or my cryotherapy chamber or anything like that around that you can use. Cold water exposure is something I do every day. All of my clients do it, and we'll often do a 20 to 30-minute cold bath or cold water swim at some point during the week to tap into all of these fat loss and cognitive enhancing benefits, again, without the spendy biohacks. Wait, there's more. The infrared sauna, this is another one I get a lot of questions about. Really good, again, for nitric oxide production, for lysing fat cells, especially if you take something like niacin beforehand. It's very good to, of course, get a lot of the benefits of heat shock protein and stress resilience that comes with it. I do, when I am at home, infrared sauna several times per week. But do you know what else I do? If it's hot outside, I wait until the hottest time of day to go out and exercise. So I get all those same type of benefits from exercising or movement in the heat. Because guess what the sun produces? near and far infrared. Okay, you'll get exposed to that type of stuff from natural outdoor sunlight. You don't have to go buy a fancy infrared sauna or an infrared light bulb that you hang over your bed. You can simply, when it's hot outside, go out and exercise, okay? And you can bundle up. Yes, you can be that person out with their coat and their long pants in the sun outside exercising. You're still getting some vitamin D from the face and the hands, but there are ways that you can hack heat acclimation without heat. No, only the areas of the skin that are exposed will infrared penetrate. Yeah, good question. Vibration platforms. You'll see these along with rebounding trampolines as things that are marketed in the community as ways to lose fat, to activate lymph fluid, to never get sick again. But I have a secret for you. There are other things that, very similar to a $2,000 vibration platform, will activate lymph flow and will activate blood flow and will achieve many of the similar benefits. For example, every time I get out of bed, I do 100 of these, okay? They're free, they're easy, they're cheap. They're called jumping jacks. I'll teach you later on if you want to learn how they go, but believe it or not, there's not a big difference between doing 100 jumping jacks and standing on an expensive vibration platform for 5 minutes, okay? So don't always look at the mechanism of action behind a biohack, right? You're getting that type of idea. Here's another one, and another one that you'll see me on silly photos on Instagram doing: green blue light therapy in the morning to shift the circadian rhythm forward or backwards. Okay, greenish blue light therapy for 20 to 25 minutes. Great if the sky is cloudy or it's dark or it's gray or if I have to be indoors or anything like that. However, and you probably saw this coming, going outside and simply looking at the sun is another thing that I'll do. And I will simply go outside. There's something to facing the sun when the sun has come up in the morning, facing the sun in those early hours of the morning and looking at it, okay? And another practice that I'll do, for example, is those 100 jumping jacks I told you about. If the sun is bright and it's outside, I'll go outside and I'll look directly into the sun. Big bursts of sun straight into my eyes as I'm doing those jumping jacks. So I get many of the similar effects as these spendy blue and green light producing glasses, but in a more natural setting. Okay, so another thing to think about adding into your protocol, all these things add up. Okay, all these things add up without you spending $20,000 on your own biohacking lab. Here's another one, electric brain stimulation, attaching electrodes to the brain like transcranial direct stimulation. I'm going down to LA to do 5 days of this next week. I'm going to be rewiring my brain. I'm going to come back with a $20,000 cap that attaches to my head, and I'll spend 3 months retraining my brain via neurofeedback to send blood flow to areas of the brain that are currently deficient in blood flow. However, I'm doing that as a biohack to guinea pig something on myself. There are other things that increase blood flow to the brain and have been proven in clinical studies to enhance cognition. Kundalini Yoga is perhaps one of the better known forms of yoga that, if you haven't yet gone out of your way to learn, I would highly recommend that you do if you want one of the best ways to not only get yourself to release consciously the same type of DMT as would get released if you were doing ayahuasca, but to be able to enhance cognition and blood flow to all different areas of the brain without actually wearing a special cap or buying a special laptop or piece of neurofeedback equipment. Kundalini Yoga is one of the few forms of yoga that can actually do this. Another one for you to look into. And I have just a few more, and I'm totally ignoring the timer because you've already sent me into Q&A, right? We have how many minutes left? Before Q&A. Okay, good. We're doing fine then. So Muse, headbands that allow you to get into a meditative state or that train you as you get into that meditative state to stay in that state. Okay, you can certainly get these type of headbands. You can wear them. You can use apps like Headspace. Both of my children have been meditating for 2 years. And do you know how they do it? Do you think I bought them a Headspace? Do you think I bought them a Muse or any of these other fancy apps or even an app on their phone? No. What they do is they go outside each day for 10 minutes. They have a special spot. It's their spot in the forest that they sit in. They do owl eyes. They use their peripheral vision to look both to the side and up and down without actually moving the eyes. They listen, they taste the air, they smell, and they feel what they can feel around them. And they simply sit for 10 minutes. It's a Native American practice called a sit spot. If you have the outdoors and a body, you do not need an expensive meditation app. Meditation is sexy right now, and trust me, it's only going to become sexier and more trendy. And I am, frankly, a little bit annoyed by the number of people who don't meditate because they don't know how. You just go outside and you sit. Okay? It's really not rocket science. You go outside and you sit. Moving on. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide is something the Scientific American magazine just named as the future of anti-aging, a new drug. NAD. And there are now clinics popping up that will do NAD injections. There are supplements like Niacel that Thorne makes and other forms of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide that are designed, I'm just saying that again instead of NAD so I sound smart. But they're making all these different forms of injections and pills and supplements for NAD, for a really, really potent antioxidant. There is a bark tea that's been used for thousands of years, especially in South America. It's called Paudarco. The active component of Paudarco, and I need to recall because I don't remember, a beta-lapachone or beta-lapacone. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly because mostly I've only read it. That happens to me sometimes. I'm a notorious mispronunciator. But this Paudarco bark tea, you can purchase it. You can ferment it overnight for 10 to 12 hours. You can put it into that same Vitamix that you made your vegetable powders in. And when you blend it, especially if you blend it with a fat like coconut oil or MCT oil or fish oil or anything else that is a fat, you form phospholipids that are highly absorbable and that give you that same type of NAD exposure as you would get with an injection at a fancy biohacking clinic. And it's simply a tea that your ancestors used that you put into a blender, and then you filter it through a strainer or through a paper towel or whatever happens to be handy, and you get the same effect in a much more, what I would argue, would be ancestral, easy, less expensive, less hectic way than traveling to San Diego for injections, for example. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying, if you want the natural method. Here's another one. What they're now doing is taking bacteria. This is a company called Juicy Print, and I have a really fascinating article about this. They're basically inducing the ability of a bacteria to produce cellulose that they can do things with, like grow new body parts and heal tissue when they take this bacteria and they expose it to a field that causes it to produce cellulose. Very interesting, and a lot of people are now using this as like a biohack to 3D print, for example, body parts that could eventually be used to replace other body parts. However, when I see this type of thing in terms of inducing the body to produce something or to heal itself, I think of a couple of things. First of all, the research that came out a couple of years ago that showed that if you have chlorophyll in your bloodstream combined with exposure to light, meaning if you eat green things and go out in the sun, your body will actually produce ATP in the absence of calories. We actually have this ability to make energy out of what would seem to be nothing, similar to what these bacteria are doing in terms of cellulose production, with the simple combination of eating dark green plants, maybe throwing some kale in with that eggs and bacon for breakfast, or including algal sources like chlorella, for example, and then getting out and getting sunlight exposure. I'll link to the study, fascinating study that shows how we're closer to plants than we might think. But it's really amazing when you look at this, or you look at things like aloe vera and colostrum and some of these things that are chock full of growth factor precursors, growth hormone precursors, things that will induce you to heal your own tissue without actually having to 3D print a body part and slap a new ear on or a new kidney in. I did a podcast in which we talk about everything from colostrum to aloe vera to algae to all of these things that can actually heal the body from the inside out without actually using these type of modern medical techniques to replace body parts. And then the last few slides here, we have nootropics, right? Everything from Siltep to Alpha Brain to Upgraded Force to modafinil and Adderall to all of these different blends. How many of you in here have tried a nootropic or a smart drug? Right, a few of you. Not as many as perhaps at PaleoFX or some of these other conferences. You guys don't pop as many pills. I didn't give this talk there. I'm just hazarding a guess. Here's the deal. When my kids aren't having a good day, they get home, they're not happy, they're tired after school, we have this little plant that grows just outside the boundary of the grass in our yard. It's this little yellow flower. And I'll have them go out there and break open the bud and get some of the oil on their fingers and lick their fingers. It's something that's been used for depression. At least the extract of it has been used even clinically for depression. It's called St. John's wort. We call it the happy flower. right? They go outside and they take the happy flower. They don't take Ritalin or something like that inside to make them feel happy. Capers are a precursor to dopamine, as are bananas. Pine essential oil, I diffuse in a cold air diffuser in my office to enhance blood flow to the brain, very similarly to Kundalini Yoga, and it has been shown to enhance both verbal memory recall and cognition. Eggs and fish are chock full of the same type of acetylcholine and phosphatidylcholine precursors as you're going to find in many of these smart drugs. Walnuts are another. Okay, so there are things that sometimes we forget, right? How many of you keep a jar of capers in your refrigerator and eat some capers, or lick your finger after squeezing a St. John's wort flower bud in your hand rather than popping open the bottle of pills, like whatever they might happen to be? Companies I support and promote, frankly, you know, Alpha Brain by Audit or Upgraded Force by Bulletproof. Like, these things aren't bad, but at the same time, think about returning to your ancestral roots and getting some of these same neurotransmitter precursors from food. And no, a banana a day is not going to make you fat. For those of you who are worried, sometimes we fret too much because I know I'll get that question. That's sugar. That's a fructose. You get fatty liver disease. And you showed a whole bunch of them, not just one. Okay, so finally, when it comes to us considering whether we want to be like Thomas the Goat Man, right? Biohacking our bodies, prosthetic rumens, gene implants, headbands, whatever the case may be. You know, when you ask yourself this question, and I ask myself this question, do you want to be the Goat Man? Or do you simply want to be that person that perhaps owns some goats and hangs out with goats? I don't know about you, but at this point in my life, I'd much rather stray a little bit more into the latter than the former, and I would encourage you to think about doing so yourself. I have a little bit of time for Q&A, not much at all, maybe time for one question, but I put a whole bunch of resources for you guys, tons of stories, fun videos, etc. Just go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/AHS16. I know we got a lot of hungry hippos in here because it's time for lunch. However, I'll also be in the back. I have a book that's 500 pages, chock full of, ironically, biohacks, but also natural living tips. And that book is $25, and I'll be back there. Someone will be helping, but I'll sign your book for you if you would like. And then also lots of other resources for you on my website at greenfieldfitnesssystems.com. And we have time for perhaps, let's just say 2 quick questions. Cool. All right. My moderator says yes, so let's do it.
All righty.
Oh, well, thank you, too.
Thank you. All right. What is your, number 1 or top 3 true longevity hacks, or however you like to say it, where you can really see the telomere length growing, people are looking younger, you know, women in their 60s getting their periods back, stuff where you're actually truly biologically younger? What are your, top 3? Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. Women do not like. I've worked with some, and they got. You
just made a lot out of it.
And they were like, "Oh."
No, fertility is good. Fertility is sexy. Pros outweigh the cons, women. I know it's painful, but according to the book of Genesis in the Bible, it's supposed to happen. So, all right. So, top 3: intermittent fasting. I do it every day, 12 to 16-hour fast. Sunlight exposure, preferably as much as possible, and then I would have to say environmental fluctuations in temperature. Both sweating and shivering regularly, at least having at some point during every single week where you're both sweating and shivering. Not at the same time, but.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just quickly, did you know that Apple recommends that any iPhone is no closer than 5/8 of an inch to any part of your body?
Yeah, I do. I use a Defender Shield case for my phone right now for those very reasons. Yeah, absolutely. Or keep it in airplane mode. Yep. Although I don't know what we'll do once Google launches its balloon project. Wi-Fi everywhere. Well, thank you guys, and I'll go ahead and migrate to the back, and like I mentioned, I'll reply to questions back there. I'll be available to sign a book, and I got to jet off for a bow hunting competition tonight over in Park City, so I'll be disappearing. But it was really wonderful to see you all, and just please know that anytime you want to ask me questions or anything like that, just find me online. This is what I love to do, is help people out with this kind of stuff. So thanks.